Hi everyone, welcome to Collectively Vigilant. There's a really interesting court case going on, which is in the state of Virginia in the US. This is the case against Brandon Banfield, who allegedly killed two people. Um, he admits to killing one, but he admits not to killing the other. He admits not killing his wife. He admits to killing a stranger who had supposedly broken into his house. And I put that in quotes because that's what the state is trying to disprove. The state is trying to disprove that he has actually killed both, although he admits to only one, and he says that he was standing his ground and he was in the right for killing that man because that man was, his name was Joseph Ryan, and he was attacking his wife, Christine Banfield. So, we're going to watch the opening statements together, and I'm going to give you my thoughts as a foreign lawyer who does not practice in the US. But the US court system is just so fascinating. So, let's watch it together and we'll go through it step by step. So, before we actually start with the trial, of course, for all of you who are really interested in trials, you would already know that Judge Penny, we saw her in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. So, she's a familiar face in that sense and probably one of the most covered cases in LawTube. So, Judge Penny, by the way, has a fascinating history. Even before we start with the trial, let me just tell you a little bit about her. She actually comes from a military service background. She attended the George Mason University School of Law, which is now called the Antonin Scalia School of Law. She started out as a prosecuting attorney herself. She later moved into private practice at some point, and then in 2008 she was elected as the Virginia General District to the Virginia General District Court. So she's been in private practice, she's been a prosecutor, she knows all of this, and then she was elected in 2015, so that was 10 years ago, at this point almost 11 years ago, to the Virginia General Assembly Circuit Court, and she became the first female chief judge in this role. And she's worked a lot with Veterans Affairs. She's been a veteran herself, so kudos to her. And I mean, she's really interesting. And then on the prosecution side, we see the prosecutor. Her name is Jenna Sands, and she has been practicing law since the year 2000. So it's almost at this point a 25-year veteran. 25-year experience. That's a lot of experience. She did work as a criminal defense attorney at one point, and then she switched over and she became a prosecutor, which I find so interesting because in both of these cases, in this case, what we find is that the guy who's actually the defense attorney right now started out as a prosecutor and then became a defense attorney. Then we find that Jenna Sands, who was a defense attorney at some point, is now the prosecutor. So all of these people have worn all these hats. So I find that really interesting about the American judicial system in general. Of course, I studied law from the UK, so I don't see that too much in the UK either. I don't see that in the US,
Good morning, everyone.
either. So these are just things which I find absolutely fascinating as a foreign attorney. Every time I get to watch one of these trials. So I'm going to watch and I'm going to give my 2 cents to this trial. The guy who's defending Brandon Banfield, I keep wanting to say Brandon Sanderson, the writer. No, but then this guy is Brandon Banfield. The guy who's actually defending Brandon Banfield is a gentleman by the name of John F. Carroll, and he used to be a prosecutor and has now gone into defense work, private defense work. He is the head of a law firm. He has actually been practicing since the early 1990s. So this gentleman also has almost 40 years of experience. And then the prosecutor has about 25 years of experience. Judge Penny, as I told you, is a fascinating person herself, has been a defense attorney, has been a prosecutor, has been a veteran of the armed forces. So, this is a very sort of illustrious group of people here. How we feel about them as things go on might change, But as of now, these are all very impressive people. So the prosecution is going first. The state will first explain their case and pitch, basically present their pitch to the jury. Usually there are 12 members of the jury, and then they have a few extra jurors as well, just in case somebody falls sick all of a sudden. So those are alternate jurors. Nobody knows who's actually going to be a part of the decision making process. Initially, when everybody sits in the jury, they basically don't know. So that's something that the American justice system does really well. Another really interesting thing that works with the American justice system is, or maybe I should say legal system, American legal system, is that they make sure to actually pick people from the DMV, which is, the motor vehicles ministry, where everybody, people of all sorts, of all kinds, of course, have like a car license in America. So people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different religions, different faiths, people from different walks of life, different races, which is really interesting in America because you have so many. It's a melting pot of people from all around the world. So these are interesting
and
things.
ask you
Okay, so
to
Jana Sands is
please
going first.
remember that your
and she's
job here
representing
is to
the state's
listen to the evidence,
and this
right?
is
Take notes if you
basically
need to.
she's going to explain
Follow
the story
along
to
with the
the jurors,
details. There will be
and
many,
that's what's going on here.
and then be thoughtful in how you consider this evidence when it's time to deliberate. We're here today because Brendan Banfield, the man seated behind me, killed his wife, Christine Banfield, and another man named Joseph Ryan. Those two individuals had no reason to know each other, but for the plotting and planning of Brendan Banfield. Christine, back in 2022, was 37 years old. She was an ICU nurse working at Inova Fairfax. She was married to Brendan, who was then 38, and they had a daughter, 4-year-old Valerie.
One thing I'd like to add about Christine that has not been said by the prosecution is that not only was she a 37-year-old ICU nurse with a 4-year-old daughter, as a matter of fact, she worked in some really interesting areas of nursing. She even worked for victims of sexual violence, and that's a very specific kind of nurse. They get special training to work with people who have freshly been assaulted and how to collect that evidence, because that whole process can take up to 6 to 7 hours at times, because every single part of your body needs to be examined and needs to be meticulously detailed. So ICU nurses and nurses who actually do that are a godsend, especially for in not only in general but also because these women work on things, and it's mostly those kind of nurses are usually women. They work on things that most other nurses never experience. So I just wanted to add that in because the prosecution has not presented that about Christine.
Christine worked odd shifts. She was a nurse. Many of you know what nurses' hours are. She could work nights. The schedule was irregular. It didn't occur with a 9-to-5 pattern. So regular daycare was not an option for the family. They hired an au pair, Juliana Peres Magalhães. She was from Brazil. She was 22 years old when she joined the family. She provided care while Brendan traveled for work and Christine worked her nurse's hours. The family lived in the Reston area of Fairfax County at 13230 Stablebrook Way. You'll hear that address referenced. You'll see pictures of the home. You'll have the opportunity to understand what the layout of the house was, as it is very relevant to what happened in February of 2023. Taking you back, in August of 2022, Brendan began an affair with Juliana. Initially, it was just sex when Christine was at work or asleep, but eventually it developed into a relationship. They went on dates. They went to bars, clubs, dancing. They went on romantic bike rides. By the fall of 2022, they were fully in love, planning their future. On a trip to New York, Brendan revealed his desire to get rid of Christine. Divorce was not an option for him. He didn't want to lose custody of Valerie. He didn't even want to share custody of Valerie. He thought Christine was a terrible mother. He wanted her out of the picture. And he convinced young Juliana, 22 years old, not from the United States, living in his home, in love with him, that they should get rid of Christine.
I think it's really interesting that the prosecution brought up really early that this is a woman who's much younger than Brandon. She was 22, he was 37, 38 at the time of the murder, and the affair started when he was 37 and she was 21, and she's living under his roof. He's the employer. I think it's really smart that the prosecution sort of laid that out so that that power dynamic is, present in the minds of the jury as they're listening, and also people would be more sympathetic as well, because this is clearly a woman whose probably second or third language might be English. She's Brazilian, so probably her second language was English. So very interesting. I mean, if she knew Portuguese and Spanish, it would be the third language, right? So I think it's really interesting that the prosecution brings that in really early in the case.
He talked about hiring a hitman, finding someone to kill her for money. But he was concerned that that would tie back to him, that there would be too much evidence against him and that he could end up at risk. So they crafted a plan. They would use Christine's email accounts to create a fake profile to lure someone in who was into kinky sex, violent sex. And they would get this guy to come into the house and fake rape Christine. Brendan would be the hero of the day. He would show up, kill the guy, kill his wife, pretending that he didn't
just as
back out.
plans go, this is one of the better plans one has heard in the world of true crime. It is very meticulously thought out. How the husband would, ensnare people, or husband and Juliana, Brandon and Juliana, would ensnare people over a website, over an app, which is meant for people who are into kinky sex. And they would ensnare those people, and Christine wouldn't even know that they're recruiting people to fake sexually assault her. And I mean, it was very well thought after, and that's what makes this case so interesting, because one of the major things that the prosecution has working for them is that they were able to flip the co-defendant. And if she had not flipped, probably Brandon would never ever go to jail. So very interesting.
They put it into action. Brendan created a FetLife account. If you're not familiar with it, it's a social networking app for people interested in fetishes, sexual kink. He posted as Christine, seeking fulfillment of this stranger rape fantasy. He and Juliana spent weeks chatting with potential victims, searching for just the right guy who would follow Brendan's plan to a T. Because remember, this plan hinged on several things. Christine never knowing that it existed, and Christine never being expected to meet with her potential fake rapist. In this community of people, there weren't many takers for such a risky plan. It had red flags all over the place. But by January 24th, 2022, Brendan had found his target, Joseph Ryan, posting as Taco Supreme 7000. Joe engaged in friendly conversation with who he thought was an attractive woman new to kink. Brendan, posting as Christine, spent a month creating this relationship with Joe that would eventually lead to Joe's murder. Meanwhile, other things were going on to prepare for this murder. Brendan bought Juliana a gun and took her to the shooting range to teach her to shoot.
So I'm going to add my 2 cents on, unfortunately, I looked through at least like 10 or 12 newspaper articles just to find more evidence about this whole court case. The two murderers are on the forefront, as it always happens in, most true crime cases. Christine is at least getting some limelight as the primary, victim, whose husband and her au pair basically came up with this whole plan. But poor Joseph Ryan is nowhere in the whole narrative. We only know him as someone who was in a particular person's house because he was there for a sexual kink. Other than that, we don't know anything about him. So I went looking, of course. And the only thing that I know for sure is he was living with his grandmother but at the time of his death, he was 38 years old, so almost Christina's age. They were both almost the same age, and that he had a little dog, and there could be several reasons why people of his family have not come forward, because look at the way Brandon and Christina Magalhães has, initially portrayed this man as an intruder who had walked into their house to murder Christina, and then later on we get to know that he was lured there for a sexual fantasy. So, nonetheless, I mean, I feel really terrible for this man who's only known to all of us as the person who was there for a sexual kink. So those are my 2 cents about him. I just I couldn't even find anything. I mean, I must have looked through so many websites just trying to find more about this man.
Brendan had Juliana help him test out the soundproofing of the new windows that had been installed at Stablebrook Way. By the time this plan was ready to be hatched, Joe was fully on board. He had not questioned any of the asks of him. He had continued to engage in this relationship and appeared to be the perfect willing victim.
This is really elaborate. They're practicing in shooting ranges. They soundproof the windows, and by the way, the prosecution is going to bring on the person who soundproofed the window. It was a really expensive proposition to get that done, and just for soundproofing. It's not like these people were podcasters or something and they wanted to soundproof. By the way, I'm quite familiar with the fact that I haven't soundproofed anything, so you can probably hear the traffic go by. So yeah, I mean, that's an expensive thing to do. So it's quite an elaborate plan, very premeditated.
Brendan created the narrative that Christine desperately wanted to be raped. Posing as Christine, he told Joe what to do. Come to the home in Reston. The door will be unlocked. Christine will be asleep in bed. Come straight upstairs, cut off her clothing, tie her, rape her. Simple and fun. That was how it was posed. Joe was willing to follow.
And this is so counterintuitive because, as I told you a few minutes ago, we know that Christine actually worked with people who had suffered sexual violence, and she was the nurse who would actually do what's called the sexual assault kit. So the fact that this man is building that narrative about his wife, of the woman he had known for almost 20 years at that point, of course shows how heartless he is, and what a sociopath, my lord, to have a husband like that and to build a narrative about a woman who had done nothing but to work with people who were facing sexual violence.
These rules that Brendan set out posing as Christine, they would not meet in person beforehand. Joe's phones would be left in the car. Joe was to bring a knife, zip ties, chains. And most importantly, he was not to stop. Even if she looked terrified, even if she was calling for help, he was to follow through because that's what she really wanted. On February 24th, 2023, Brendan Banfield's birthday, the plan was put into action. Knowing that Christine had the day off, Brendan and Juliana arranged a fake outing for the zoo a fake outing at the zoo for Valerie. Juliana and Valerie packed a lunch, prepared for this fake outing. Christine, still in bed, asleep, at 6 a.m.
Oh my God!
Brendan
like for a
takes her
second, let's
phone
just
and
stop
Valerie
and think about
downstairs.
this woman's
She sat-
last moments in life, where she's in bed. She was a nurse. This was around 6 a.m. in the morning. She's in bed. Somebody sort of enters her house out of nowhere. She must have been terrified. She sees him. Seconds later, her husband thankfully has come to her rescue. So that's what she's thinking in her head, that thankfully my husband's come to the rescue. And imagine the betrayal that she would have then known, because he, according to the prosecution, is the one who killed them both. And the other man was just lured there so that he can be a pawn in this whole chess game that Brandon Magalhães have come up with. And these, I mean, I don't even think Joseph Ryan would have had any kind of thought as to what's going on. Did he even know he was being set up? And then when it comes to Christine, imagine that betrayal of your own husband, or at least your boyfriend of 20 years, and later husband, who is now stabbing you to death. And she was stabbed multiple times. And apparently she kind of survived, according to Brandon, for a few seconds, and she was able to talk a little bit. But imagine the sheer betrayal and the terrifying moments that led up to her death. It's just God, it's people are so evil sometimes.
Brendan created the narrative that Christine desperately wanted to be raped. Posing as Christine, he told Joe what to do. Come to the home in Reston. The door will be unlocked. Christine will be asleep in bed. Come straight upstairs, cut off her clothing, tie her, rape her. Simple and fun. That was how it was posed. Joe was willing to follow these rules that Brendan set out posing as Christine. They would not meet in person beforehand. Joe's phones would be left in the car. Joe was to bring a knife, zip ties, chains, and most importantly, he was not to stop, even if she with Joe to confirm a 7:20 arrival for the execution of the fake rape. And Brendan then disables the door lock, preventing it from automatically locking, turns off Christine's phone, and puts it in a drawer in the kitchen where she couldn't possibly find it to call for help when she finds an intruder in her home. Brendan leaves the house, followed shortly by Juliana. Brendan drives to a nearby McDonald's. Juliana waits in the cul-de-sac. The plan to give a call out to Brendan as soon as she sees Joe. Valerie's in the back seat, and Juliana has a gun in her pocket. When Joe arrives, Juliana calls Christine's cell phone first to create a record of a fake warning, even knowing that the phone is turned off. She then calls Brendan to let him know that Joe is in the house. Brendan leaves the McDonald's, drives directly to the home, meets up with Juliana, and with Valerie in tow, they re-enter the house through the basement. Juliana, nervous, screws up the plan and calls 911, too early. She hangs up as soon as Brendan's giving her the signal that this wasn't the plan. They leave Valerie in the basement. They sneak up the stairs to the bedroom where they hear Joe Ryan and Christine. Brendan enters the bedroom first, shooting Joe in the head, picks up the knife that Joe had brought, and stabs Christine repeatedly in the neck. He directs Juliana to shoot Joe a second time with her gun.
Oh, that's so interesting that both of them actually shot Joseph Ryan. So there is a log of bullets from both the sides going into Joseph Ryan. So I think Brandon was being really smart because he wanted her to be the real co-defendant, and at no point would she be able to back off and say, all I did was, what this man told me to. Her hands are on that gun. So I find that so interesting.
Juliana to shoot Joe a second time with her gun. This time the bullet enters Joe's chest. With Christine dead or dying, Brendan spends the next several minutes manipulating Joe Ryan's body, in the process leaving Christine's blood on Joe's hands and pants. Juliana calls 911, this time as scheduled, to report, and Brendan tells the police, I shot him, he stabbed her. You'll hear all of this from Juliana, but we're not asking you to believe her alone. You'll hear from witnesses and experts about all of the evidence that corroborates the facts presented. You'll see the FetLife chats. You'll see the Telegram messages. You'll hear and see
I thought that
the
was
phone
really
calls.
interesting because she said the narrative of that Juliana will give us And then she says, but the blood cannot lie. So, like a second, almost like in the head of the jury, if I was sitting there, I was like, so are you suggesting that she's going to lie? And the only thing, but then the only thing we should rely on is hence the blood evidence. But she's really, I mean, the prosecutor is doing a great job of explaining to the jury, who will be, by the way, hearing this for the first time. They don't always know what kind of case they're coming in for. It's an absolute surprise. They might think they're coming in for like a DUI or like a vehicular manslaughter. I didn't mean DUI, I meant vehicular manslaughter. But what a mind blowing case for a jury who just walks in and then hears all this.
Details. You'll hear the 911 calls where Brendan admits to shooting Joe. You'll see body-worn camera video from the responding officers. You'll see photos of the crime scene and the physical evidence collected. And that's where you should focus your attention. Because while Juliana presents us with the narrative, that story that we wouldn't necessarily know but for her details, it is the blood evidence that you can rely upon without a doubt. The blood cannot lie. And the blood puts Brendan Banfield standing over Christine, stabbing her in the neck until she died. With that evidence, we will ask you to find Brendan Banfield guilty of these murders, the associated charges of neglecting his child, and of creating a danger for her in that home.
So it seems like the lesser included charge is not only, of course, the murder of Christine and Joseph Ryan, but also the neglect of the child, who was conspicuously put into this whole situation by the father just so that he can really sell this story to the police. And he was, of course, hoping that nobody was going to check on that. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the opening statement of the case by the prosecution. It was really short, it was very sweet, and it was very surgical. Like, there was nothing emotional about it. And I don't know, when we had our sort of trial advocacy courses, I think time and time again they would say you need to tug at the heartstrings of the jury, because you really need to tell a little bit more from the perspective of the victim, who is, of course, no longer there. So you're the victim's mouthpiece. And in this particular case, there are two victims, clearly. And if you include that little child who's, of course, physically here, but she's now lost her mom, and also because of the stupidity, her dad as well, right? And the only other female that she had put her faith in as a 4-year-old child is her au pair / nanny, and even that woman is in the trenches in this murder. So the multiple layers of betrayal for that child, and her child's name is Valerie. Anyway, so this brings us to the end of the prosecution's opening. So this is John F. Carroll. He is the defense attorney. He is going to speak now.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we had a long day yesterday, and we talked about a lot of the issues that would possibly come up, and they're going to come up today in terms of the story that the Commonwealth just told you, and what I think you should be looking out for in terms of the evidence. There's some interesting things that, in order to assess, first of all, what they're saying, and second of all, the evidence that's going to be before you, is you have to look at certain timelines. So the murder of Christine Banfield by Joe Ryan occurred on February 24th, 2023. The arrest of Julia...
Let me quickly pause there. Did you see what he did? He said the murder of Christine Banfield by Joseph Ryan, because that's what their narrative is. They're saying Brandon was forced to kill Christine's murderer, who was a man by the name of by the name of Joe Ryan, and Brandon is the hero who came to rescue his wife. So did you see that he said that?
On February 24th, 2023. The arrest of Juliana Peres Magalhães took place in October of 2023. She was held for nearly another year.
So just in case you don't know, a murder charge is a felony, it's the highest kind of crime, that or aggravated murder or great bodily harm, the felony charges. So what the defense attorney John F. Carroll is saying, he's saying, well, you know what, they've promised Juliana to flip her, uh, so that she can be a rat, is or she can be a snitch, is because they've actually promised her that they will give her the lesser charge of manslaughter and not murder, and they're basically going to give her time served because she's already been in jail for 2 years. So they're going to let her go, and that's why this woman is going to build this narrative that Brandon is the one who killed Christina and Joseph Ryan.
Before she made the statements that are the full and complete support of what the Commonwealth just told you. And she did that because the Commonwealth decided, better not do that again. We go through a period of time into September. The stress and the anxiety starts to really ramp up for her. Approaching her November 12th court date. My client gets arrested. In her mind, she loses even more hope because he was the person who was on the outside, who she really was depending on. They had an affair. You're not going to get any disputes from us. But he played a role, a supportive role to her while she was in jail, while they tried to do their little experiment on what would she take in order to come forward and tell a story.
They offered her a misdemeanor. If that's true, that would be insane, because I think the prosecution itself is saying that she did, of course, put one bullet in Joseph Ryan's body. So giving someone a misdemeanor when they have clearly at least contributed to the death of a human being in a major way by putting a bullet in their body would be really something. So let's hope that the defense can actually prove the things that they're saying, because these are opening statements. It's basically like the index of a book. It tells you what's been promised at what stage. So this is just, let's hope that he can back it up.
You'll hear in October, she went for emergency surgery, had a gallbladder surgery, spent 2 weeks in the hospital. And soon after she got out, she received word that her attorney was going to continue the case again because he needed to get a digital forensics examiner in order to review the evidence. That hadn't been done up until that point. That was the last straw. Whatever deals that had been rejected, the most recent time was September 30th. Whatever deals had been rejected, she was in for now. One of the deals was suggested by her attorney after she was upset with him in July.
I don't know why the prosecution would go to such lengths, because they clearly know that she's done something which has contributed to the death of at least one person. So according to what the defense attorney is saying right now, that might actually mean that they know for sure that the only thing that the prosecution has is her word. So would we get to see any kind of evidence or not? That's really interesting.
Whether they arrive at this, and they have a recording of the questions that they're asking her during what they call the recant. You're going to hear some of those recordings. Now, any of you who have any sort of investigative roles in anything that you do, when you're talking to someone who's deciding to flip, you don't just take their word.
He's sowing seeds of suspicion. He's basically saying that why wouldn't this woman take it, right? Because she gets to go home and back to Brazil. She'll be deported. So why wouldn't she take it? She will just throw anyone under the bus. So in that sense, he's sowing seeds of suspicion, and he does speak very slowly. and both of them, the prosecution and the defense, have not looked at any notes when they're talking, which is great. They're doing this from memory. So, but just for my taste, he does speak a little slow.
You don't just take their word for it, you challenge them. Investigators challenge the statements that are being made. And so October 25th marks the first day that statements were made. Many of you may have seen that because it's showing up on media. And you hear someone asking her questions and then she answers those questions. Well, what we're going to be able to show you is that those answers are wrong based upon other evidence that we have in this case. But no one ever challenged her, no one ever questioned her. And so in order to have this narrative, this story that you received, Juliana Peres Magalhães is at the center of all of it. She's going to talk about where the gun was at one point, and then I think in the next recant she says it was a different situation with the gun. She said she ran into the bedroom and used the combination on the safe to get the gun, and then she had it been given to him by, or it was given to him by Brendan Banfield. I'm sorry, given to her by Brendan Banfield. You're going to hear there are significant.
I wonder why he brought that up. That the fact that she has lost faith in her own attorney, and now she's flipped, and now she's talking to the prosecution. Why would he throw her defense attorney under the bus? Is it to further basically say that she was so desperate that she would have taken any kind of, guarantee that the prosecution was giving her? That seems to be the only reason why he would bring up her ex-attorney. Which, by the way, if her attorney is the same person who has now struck a deal with the prosecution where she will only serve time served, that's an amazing attorney. I mean, somebody who can get you off from a murder trial like that's a good attorney. So I think the only reason why he's throwing her ex-attorney under the bus is to basically say she would have done anything just to get out of jail. A woman who's away from her country, a woman who's away from her
differences
family.
In many of the things that she's providing to the Commonwealth, some of which are changing even up to most recent prep sessions, which we had access to of December 30th. So the question will be, what's the final statement? I think we're all going to get that. But you're also going to see what she's done all along the way. Now, the Commonwealth used her for their case. I understand the situation that she's in, and I understand the fact that she's away from home and she's young and she's dependent on people, and she's also depending on the Commonwealth. And they put her in this situation.
They had an affair. You're not going to hear any disputes from us about that fact, which is really interesting because usually, just as normal people around the world, when we hear that someone's wife was murdered and the husband is having an affair with a much younger woman who happens to live in his own house, I think most of us have a pre.
I'm sorry to say, many people would. But it's the devastation
By the way, he does
that
speak really
causes
slowly.
when
And
you
I'm
ask
on a
for that
1.25
kind
speed.
of testimony to be included in your case. Now let's just talk a little bit. Jeremy, just get a sip of water. Let's just talk a little bit about some of the other things that are going on in this case. And I think you'll find this through the evidence. So what essentially, and you may have heard it in media, is there's a theory called catfishing. And catfishing, for those who don't know it, and people more experienced and more expert than I will be able to tell you specifically, essentially is assuming the devices of someone in order to get something done, is the easy, quick. There's probably more sophisticated explanation for it. But what they're saying is Brendan Banfield assumed his wife's devices, his computer, her phone, any other devices in order to take on take on her persona in order to invite this gentleman, Joe Ryan, in. Catfishing is a
Give
theory
up her devices?
that
As
requires
in, they assumed control of it, or
a conclusion
did they share a
that
device? I mean,
Christine
if I was
Banfield
sitting
gave
there
up
as
her
a jury
devices.
member, I would be really confused about what's the meaning of the word giving up devices, and this gentleman talks so slowly, by the way.
The Commonwealth's experts have concluded from the moment that the devices were examined and extracted that she did not give up her devices. And so then started the turmoil within the police department that I think is going to come out here. I doubt it'll be in the Commonwealth's case.
Oh, so basically their narrative is that she called this man over to her house because she had a sexual assault fantasy, and she was the one who did the whole thing, and her husband is indeed this chivalrous hero who came and rescued her. My lord, what a narrative the defense is building so far. No.
But there were people within the command staff who were trying to change what the experts said about Christine Banfield's devices. They were trying to say that Christine Banfield did give up these devices or was away when those devices were being used. But you're going to have a conclusion that was from the very early moments that she had not given that up. Now that's significant because all of the things that Juliana Peres Magalhães has talked to you about is inextricably intertwined with catfishing. And so you're going to hear evidence from their expert witness. You're going to hear evidence from an expert witness that I have that concurs in their expert witness's findings. And in the world of digital forensics, there's a saying, digital forensics doesn't lie. People lie. And there are going to be plenty to see. You're going to see manipulation within the police department where if those that wanted the catfishing theory, if the line homicide prosecutors, homicide detectives didn't agree with this theory, they were transferred. When this case started, there were 12 people in the homicide squad. As this case goes to trial now, there's only 4 of those 12 there.
Oh, wow. Quite an allegation. Kind of like the Karen Reed case. So he's basically saying that there was a narrative which was brought up by some detectives, which the prosecution has already backed. And if there's any police officer in the whole police station who would disagree with that, they would just simply fire that person or transfer that person. That's amazing. Let's hope that they actually back this up with someone.
Important ones that were removed in part because they didn't agree with the people that peddled the catfish theory. The lead homicide detective, the digital forensics detective, and this was back in late 2024. I don't know how many of you are familiar with criminal prosecutions and investigations. I was a prosecutor myself here in Fairfax. I've never experienced a homicide investigation where the lead homicide detective was moved.
Well, we do know of a case where the chief detective was moved because we all are familiar with the Karen Reed trial. So they didn't even bring him up in the trials just so that they could throw her under the bus and prove that she was the one who killed her boyfriend. Anyway, that's another case that...
Prior to a trial. Digital forensics, I probably aged out of digital forensics, but That's a very important aspect of this. So I couldn't say personally whether that would have happened back in my day, but there are factors here that I think that haven't been brought forth by the Commonwealth. And in my efforts at presenting evidence, I'm going to be trying to bring that to light. As I indicated, there are serious timelines. There's a vulnerable person.
Well, I mean, I think he's right there. This is a one up for, to be preyed upon. But she's already been preyed upon by Brandon. We can take that narrative as well, because she was, as I said, 21 years old. He was 38. She has moved into this country, the US, as a au pair. She lives under his, under his roof. He's the employer. And by the way, America has a really interesting au pair system. It actually falls under what's called cultural exchange. So I looked that up, because these people are not like your usual nannies. By law, this falls under cultural exchange, and the visa that they're given is as a cultural exchange person. And people who go as au pairs are usually very young people, usually women, who can even attend university evening classes. Their work cannot exceed 40 hours a week under any circumstance. They are not full-time childcare. You can't ask them to sort of cook for you or something. It's basically meant for cultural enrichment. Most people hire a au pair just so that their child can sort of be a multilingual person. Which is endlessly enriching for a child. It's very easy to soak up a language as a sponge. So I do agree with the defense there. She was a vulnerable person who's been preyed upon by Brandon, and she's, of course, I'm not saying that she is innocent. She was fully into it. She was sleeping with her own employer while his wife was working as a nurse. She is shrewd, and if she has cut this deal, she is very shrewd.
Who's open to pray for what it is that they need. And I would respectfully suggest that Juliana Peres Magalhães is the linchpin to all of that. Now, ultimately, it's the evidence. It's not what I say. It's not what the Commonwealth says. But I say these things to you so that your ear is ready, because you're going to see a presentation of a horrible, tragic, awful event for everyone involved. And there's no disputing that. And as I said earlier, we're not disputing, you won't hear any dispute as to the relationship between Brendan Banfield and Juliana Peres Magalhães. But there's an awful lot more to look for, ladies and gentlemen, and that's what I'm asking you to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. All right, your first.
Okay, so that's the end of the defense's opening statement. We got through that. Let's see what kind of interesting people that they put on. I'm, of course, waiting for the woman who snitched on Brandon to come to the trial.